So, funny story. When I was a kid, as everyone else watched Star Trek, I just hated it. I wasn't even really a big fan of Star Wars. I would watch it, but I wasn't a fan at that time. Star Trek, for some reason, I hated it because every single time I walked into a house, it was Star Trek, or it was Law and Order, or it was Star Trek, or it was Law and Order. That's all it was. And I watched both of them, binge watching, enjoying every moment of it now that I'm in my 30s. So, I'm just going to throw this one out. As a fan of Star Wars for most of my life, and catching up with every single series, watching them all for Star Trek, Star Trek is way better than Star Wars by a long shot. Don't get me wrong, Star Wars is good, but Star Trek, dude, the storylines are just, and the characters are so amazing, and the acting is so phenomenally done. It's just better. That's all I can say. Star Wars does not compare to Star Trek whatsoever. Welcome back to another episode of Wander's Way podcast. I'm your host, Dustin, and today I want to speak about Star Trek. All things nerdy and geeky. That's me. And so are you for listening to this. With that being said, so we got three main series that are considered the best. And I can say they are the best. But which one do I think is the best and for what reasons? So let's just get right into it. We're starting with the original series. Obviously, the original series is the beginning of Star Trek. Like, there's nothing I can say about it to change anything whatsoever. But I will say, after all of the other series have come out, it is not the best. It is great, but it is not the best for me. Just because, it was the beginning. And that's what makes it great, because it was good when it came out. But there's a lot of key aspects that are kind of missed in the series, which they've kind of added into every series afterwards. So the other two that I want to speak about is obviously The Next Generation with Captain Picard, and then Deep Space Nine with Captain Sisko. So, to get this one out of the way, which one is my favorite of those two for captains? It's obviously going to be Picard. I absolutely loved Picard. I think he was one of the best captains. So, when we come to these two series, I have love and hates of both. Not necessarily hates, just somewhat dislikes or a little change here and there kind of deal. But my adoration for them both are very, very high. So, starting with The Next Generation, I loved the character development. And it's the typical, Star Trek way. In a starship, travel to each planet and sectors and so on and so forth. Which, that's what the series is based on. And it's awesome. The storylines were good. The plot was good. From the beginning to the end, I thought was excellent for The Next Generation. The character building, I thought they were good. But one thing's missing in it is understanding and knowing the enemies and other species. They didn't really get in detail with a whole lot of stuff. They did explain some things, but not everything that was really needed, at least to me. I didn't know I actually needed that until I actually got to Deep Space Nine. That is when I realized that's what I needed to understand the other species more. So that is the fault of the Next Generation for me. There's just not a whole lot of anything else there. Of course, the main focal point was around the starship, the Enterprise. And who's my favorite character of the Next Generation? Well, it's my favorite character out of every series, and that is Data. Data will always be my favorite. I love his character. I think it is amazing. Oh, just perfect. And yet he can be broken and beaten and killed. So there's so many bits and pieces to his character development that just made it worthwhile. Of course, you have Worf in there, and Worf is also in Deep Space Nine, which I have to say is when Worf got to Deep Space Nine, he was way better. I enjoyed him because you really get to understand him more in detail, more back storytelling, and more character development for him. And you get to see a nice change where he still kept his Klingon style of life, in ways. But, he had that buttery smooth storytelling that helped his character development for the better. And the better for the Klingon Empire at that. So I loved it. And, Captain O'Brien, or not Captain, but O'Brien there, man, I really enjoyed him. You didn't get a whole lot of him, well, or should I say a whole lot of storytelling for O'Brien in the Next Generation, but he was good. He has some episodes where he had this hate, and he actually had that in Deep Space Nine too, so he had a way big character development on him as well. And when he got to Deep Space Nine, it just took off of the story. And he was a huge focal point. So, I loved it. But with the Next Generation, from the very first episode, I fell in love. I loved it. Now, it was a little different when I got to Deep Space Nine. So, Deep Space Nine, the beginning, because I guess because I was so used to Next Generation. So, when I got to Deep Space Nine, and it showed the new captain, so Captain Sisko, God, I couldn't stand him. I thought it was boring at first. And then, Kira came in, and I was like, now who's this? And it just, like, the first season, I kept watching, but the first season, I didn't really have anything for it. I didn't feel anything for it. Then season 2 came along, and more character development started happening. And to the point where I think it was about season 3 is when I truly fell in love. I mean, it was very slow for me, but when it hit in season 3 to the very end, I was just glued. And I have to say that Deep Space Nine I thought was way better than the Next Generation. If you can truly get into that first season, you get past it. For me, that's how it was. It was too slow for me. The characters just didn't seem right at first. The opening, I didn't, and one thing is missing. One thing is missing of Deep Space Nine, though, is, you saw the very beginning with the Borg. You don't really see anything, or, you figured that would have been a focal point. It was the very beginning of the series. You think that would have been a big-ass focal point of the whole series. So you really don't get anything of the Borg ever again. So, who knows what happened to the Borg? But the character developments and the backstories of everybody and the planets and introduction of Section 31 and the Maquis into Deep Space Nine for the Federation. Oh man, dude, it's so astounding how it took off. I actually thought them, at first, because the first couple seasons, I was like, they're not going anywhere. They're not visiting new planets. They're not going off the ship. They're just in a space station, or they're in a spacecraft, and then they're back in the space station. It was kind of irritating at first. But as the characters started to develop more, especially Dax, and you get to know what Trills are more, because I didn't understand Trills really until Deep Space Nine. And the Bajorans, I didn't really know them at all until Deep Space Nine. But then you get to Cardassians, where you get to understand them more, which, let me tell you, the backstory, the focal point story, and then the ending of the Cardassian story here for the entire series was a massive change that I did not expect, and I loved. It is brilliant. And then you get the Ferengi, which, their planet changed. A huge backstory with Quark. I love Quark. It's just, everybody has just a perfect layout for their story. I didn't find many plot holes as I did in Next Generation, which nothing negative about Next Generation. I loved it. But there was a couple plot holes here and there. And, so I truly believe Deep Space Nine is the best Star Trek series out there. Perfect to the end. Somewhat. There's a little bit of things here that I was like, what? Makes no sense. The ending was not what I expected at all. Like, not at all. I was hoping to see more Captain Picard in Deep Space Nine. You only saw him at the very beginning, which I understand that transition and all. And I understand the whole thing with Captain Sisko. But man, I hated Captain Sisko when it started. He came out and didn't seem like there was any charisma. And I think it was season 3 when it started. The end of season 2 into season 3 is when I started to like Captain Sisko. He grew a beard. It seems like they really changed the dynamics of his character and made him more charismatic. And that's how it appeared to me, I guess. And now I absolutely love Captain Sisko. I think he's really good. But man, that ending. Oh, I'm not going to spoil it for anyone that hasn't seen it. I'm pretty sure half of my audience have seen it, because I know some don't watch that kind of stuff either. So I'm not going to ruin it. But man, that ending, it was worth watching. There's 7 seasons for both series, so but I binge watched Deep Space Nine and Next Generation. As I did with my opening here, I didn't like Star Trek as a kid. I liked Star Wars a little bit, as a kid. Wasn't my great favorite thing. But I hated Star Trek, and I think it's because when I walked in to somebody's house, they always had it on. It's the same thing with Law & Order. I absolutely hated that show when I was a kid. Now, I've watched every single episode and will rewatch it because it's so good. But man, I don't know what it was, but I was turned off by everything as a kid. It's the same thing with food, too. I hated food. Now I eat everything. Did you know I even hated cranberry sauce? I thought it was disgusting when I was a kid. Now I just slurp it up. It's so delicious. So, yeah. So there's a major change in my own character development, let me tell you. But with that being said, though, I would love to hear your guys' opinions and thoughts about your favorite Star Trek series and why, and the characters. As I said, I wasn't going to go over the original Star Trek series because there's no need. Nothing I can say about it can change it at all. It's great, it's legendary, it's simple as that. But for me, my favorite is Deep Space Nine, and then it's the Next Generation, and then the original series. And then after that, I would have to say Voyager would probably be 4th for me, I would say. But Deep Space Nine is definitely number 1, even though it took so long to get into. Yeah, I think it was brilliant. And then you also had the war in there too for Deep Space Nine. Learning about the Dominion, learning about Odo and the Founders. And who's my favorite character out of Deep Space Nine? Well, it's hard to choose. But I would have to give it to... Oh, man. I'd have to give it to Odo. I would have to give it to Odo. Something about him just really drew me in a lot. I did like the Dr. Bashir. At first, I hated him. Just like Captain Sisko, I hated him. Yeah, I just saw these new guys, and I was just like, who the hell are these people? Like, they seem cartoony, they don't seem real, they don't seem legit for Star Trek, and then, like I said, season 3 came, and I just fell in love with it, so yeah, I want to know if it took you guys this long to get into a series after watching the previous series, you know? It wasn't like that for the Next Generation after the originals. In fact, by the first episode, I already liked Next Generation better. But I still gave a chance to see how much it would falter. But anyways, with that being said, definitely leave a rate. Let me know in the comments what you think about Star Trek, what your views are. There will be a question if you're listening here on Spotify. So with that being said, you guys have a wonderful week, and I will see you here next week.